They called her the War Princess, a title whispered in fear across the star systems. She commanded fleets that glassed worlds and legions that never knew defeat. Yet, in the desolate silence of her command deck, she was nothing more than a child trapped in an endless, paralyzing shiver. The nightmares she could not conquer were the shadows of a billion dead, and every stellar emperor who had ever tried to cure her pain had failed. All it took was one human, a man with nothing but a quiet, steady gaze, to face the terror that ruled her soul, and in doing so, risk inciting the wrath of her entire battle-hardened army. The crystalline structure of the Grand Citadel on Ethelon Prime was designed to inspire awe, not comfort. It spiraled toward the purple-hued sky, a monolithic testament to the enduring power of the Elven supremacy. But inside the private chambers of Princess Lyra, the air was cold, thin, and brittle. Mirroring the state of its occupant, Lyra was an elf of the high Ethelon line, beautiful in the severe, ancient way of her people, with skin like polished alabaster and hair the color of spun moonlight. She was also the ultimate military commander of the largest, unified force in the known galaxy, the terrifyingly efficient Starforged legions. At 23 standard cycles, she had seen more combat than a 1,000-year-old veteran. Yet, she was asleep now, or rather, trapped in the inescapable prison of her own mind. A small, fretful whimper escaped her lips. Beside the massive, carved obsidian sleeping platform, two figures stirred. The first was Ignis, a juvenile fire drake whose scales shimmered with residual plasma energy. Ignis was small for a drake, barely the size of a large dog, but his loyalty was absolute. He lifted his head, a column of faint smoke curling from his nostrils, his large, amber eyes fixed on his mistress. The other was Silas, a swamp drake whose camouflage green scales usually blended seamlessly into shadows. Silas was slightly larger and heavier, a patient, grounded presence. Both dragons knew the signs. Lyra's breathing hitched, then accelerated into ragged gasps. Her hands, usually steady enough to pilot a destroyer through an asteroid field, clenched the silk sheets until her knuckles were white. The silence of the room was shattered by a low, guttural shriek that scraped at the very nerves, a sound of sheer, unadulterated terror. "Mistress!" Ignis chirped, a sound that was less a word and more a focused plea of heat and distress. He nudged her arm with his warm snout, but the heat only seemed to fuel the fires of her fear. The nightmare was always the same, a flash of emerald light, the sound of a world cracking, and the cold, awful realization that she had given the order that had saved her fleet but damned an entire colony moon. A strategic necessity, the generals always reminded her, but for Lyra, it was a ghost she wore like armor. Suddenly, the reinforced door of the chamber hissed open. The High Guard captain, a massive, heavily armored elf named Valerius, entered, flanked by two armed sentinels. Their faces were grim masks of practiced concern. "The princess is distressed," Valerius stated, his voice a metallic rumble. "We must administer the calming serum, per the Supremacy Council's standing order." Ignis instantly flared, his plasma temperature spiking. The air around him shimmered, and the scent of ozone filled the room. The drake positioned himself between the guards and his mistress. "You will not touch her." His stance communicated clearly. Silas, more subtly, coiled low to the ground, his eyes tracking the guards' movements, ready to spring. The drakes, despite their size, were fierce, and even the elite guards hesitated. "Stand down, drakes," Valerius commanded, his hand moving toward the hilt of his energy blade. "This is for the War Princess's well-being. She must be lucid for the strategic briefings." As the standoff intensified, a new figure stepped into the breach. He wasn't a guard, or an officer, or even an elf. He was Orion Carr, a human xenolinguist on loan from the recently annexed Terran sector, officially here to translate captured alien archives. Unofficially, he was a tolerated curiosity. He wore simple gray overalls, and his most notable feature was a deep, unhurried stillness that seemed out of place in the frantic citadel. "Captain," Orion's voice was low, carrying a strange, unaffected calm that cut through the tension. "The serum doesn't calm her. It sedates her. The fear is still there when she wakes." Valeras turned his gaze, a cold appraisal. "Your opinion is irrelevant, translator. This is a matter of state security. Stand aside." Orion did not stand aside. He took a single slow step forward, moving past the plasma-flaring Ignis and the coiled Silas, who surprisingly did not challenge him. The Drakes were accustomed to him. He was the only one who didn't react to them with fear or awe. Only quiet patience. "You need her to be calm." "Captain, not simply unconscious," Orion reasoned, his eyes never leaving the princess's thrashing form. "Let me try something different. If I fail, you can administer your serum. But you are about to subdue the commander of your own army. Think of the precedent." The mention of the precedent subduing the War Princess gave Valerius pause. The truth was, the High Council feared her almost as much as they needed her. He glared at the human, then lowered his hand from his blade. "You have 10 standard seconds, translator," Valerius warned, his voice laced with threat. "And if you harm a single hair on her head, your entire sector will feel the Supremacy's displeasure." Orion ignored the threat. He knelt beside the platform, completely exposed to the distressed Drakes and the powerful elf. He did not touch Lyra. Instead, he simply began to speak. His voice soft, almost a lullaby, entirely in the unfamiliar, rough-hewn tones of the Terran dialect. "Lyra," he began, using her first name, an astonishing audacity. "You are safe. The fleet is whole. The legions are waiting. The war is not here." He kept talking, not about strategy or battle, but about the mundane things of his own world, the sound of rain on a metal roof, the smell of damp earth after a desert storm, the quiet, persistent rhythm of a Terran heartbeat. He spoke with no inflection of fear or subservience, just a steady, unrelenting presence. The Drakes watched, captivated. Lyra's tormented thrashing began to slow. The terrible scraping sound of her fear subsided, replaced by the quiet, alien pulse of a human voice speaking of peace. Orion Carr was simply there, a rock in the storm, offering humanity's calm dot as the tension finally began to drain from Lyra's body. Her eyes fluttered open, dark pools of residual terror mixed with a shocked confusion. She saw the glittering fury of her guards, the defensive posture of her Drakes, and the simple, ordinary face of the xenolinguist kneeling beside her bed. "It is over, War Princess," Orion whispered, his tone utterly devoid of reverence, simply factual. "Rest now. There are no ghosts here." Lyra's breath finally evened. She did not speak. She simply stared at the human, and for the first time in years, the crushing weight of 1,000 dead worlds was not immediately present in the silence. Valerius and the guards were stunned. The serum remained unused. This small, unremarkable human had done what the best elven scientists and centuries of magic had failed to accomplish. The implications of this single, quiet victory were immense, and they had just begun to ripple outward through the vast, unforgiving halls of the Starforged legions. The official report filed by Captain Valerius was necessarily clinical. Subject Lyra, successfully transitioned from nocturnal distress event. Intervention, non-pharmaceutical soothing technique administered by Xeno-specialist Carr. Outcome, immediate return to lucidity and combat readiness. The report failed to capture the atmosphere in the Grand Citadel the following morning. It was not relief that permeated the air, but a thick, glacial curiosity bordering on suspicion. The fact that a human, a member of a species barely considered useful for archives, had succeeded where their most revered elven healers and psychomancy techniques had failed, was a seismic event. Princess Lyra was unnervingly silent during the morning strategic briefing. She sat at the head of the immense projection table, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the holographic star charts detailing the current Terran annexation zone. She dismissed her generals quickly, with only the barest nod, and gave one unexpected command: "Find Orion Carr. Bring him to my study." Unarmed and unescorted, Orion was found in the deepest sub-level archives, surrounded by glowing data crystals containing the millennia of conquered species histories. When the two high-ranking elven legates approached him, he simply set down the crystal he was examining, adjusted his simple gray uniform, and followed them without a word. He showed no fear, no surprise, and certainly no pride. This lack of reaction was, to the proud elves, more disturbing than any blatant act of defiance. The War Princess's study was a stark contrast to the opulence of the Citadel. Containing only a desk carved from a single piece of dark ironwood and a viewing window that looked out over the sprawling, star-strewn galaxy. Lyra stood before the window, her back to him. Ignis and Silas nestled quietly at her feet, a first. They were almost never allowed in the formal study. "Translator Carr." Lyra's voice was melodic, yet infused with the sharpness of honed metal. "Explain your actions." Orion stood easily in the center of the room. "Princess, I observed your distress. The chemical sedatives you are given interrupt the symptom, but they do not treat the cause. A nightmare, particularly one of that intensity, requires a focus shift, not simply a shutdown of the cognitive functions." Lyra finally turned, her pale, haunting eyes locking onto his. "You spoke of rain, and metal, and a heartbeat. Why?" "They are real things," Orion replied, his gaze steady. "In your dream, you are lost in a sea of spectral fear. You need an anchor. You need something simple, undeniable, and deeply universally real to hold on to. A Terran heartbeat is steady. It is the sound of life continuing, regardless of the chaos around it. It is humanity's calm." A flicker of raw emotion, quickly veiled, crossed Lyra's face. "The memory that plagues me is the destruction of an entire moon. The death of billions. Your heartbeat is meaningless against that scale of atrocity." "With respect, Princess," Orion said softly, "that memory is a galaxy of pain. But the moment of waking, that is only one man, in one room, breathing one breath. That is the only scale that matters right then." The swamp drake Silas shifted his heavy bulk, making a low rumbling sound that could be either approval or warning. Ignis, the fire drake, stood and padded silently toward Orion, sniffing his uniform before laying his warm snout gently against the human's knee. Lyra watched this interaction with a kind of stunned detachment. The drakes, creatures fiercely loyal only to her, were accepting this human. "The Supremacy Council," Lyra continued, her voice low and dangerous, "sees your species as insignificant. They see your compassion as weakness. They believe your sudden appearance in my private chambers is a highly sophisticated, delayed assassination attempt orchestrated by a residual Terran resistance." Orion showed no offense. "That is not surprising. Fear breeds conspiracy, Princess. And your generals fear anything they cannot categorize or control. And what are you, Translator Carr?" She pressed. "You do not seem to fear me. You do not seem to fear the consequences of your actions." "I am simply a human, Princess," Orion said, shrugging slightly. "We are resilient, and we understand fear, perhaps better than your long-lived people. We live with the certainty of our short, brutal ends, yet we still reach out to comfort one another. It's what we do. It's our nature." Lyra walked slowly toward him, circling like a predator. "Tell me of your world's wars, the ones you had before we arrived. Did your generals ever feel such fear?" Orion nodded. "Every one. But they were often saved not by their ships or their weapons, but by the cooks who fed them, the medics who patched them, or the quiet, steady pilots who flew them home. Humanity is strongest not when it is conquering, but when it is enduring. As she reached him, Lyra raised her hand not in anger, but to stop. She was testing him, waiting for the flinch that would expose him as another sycophant or saboteur. Orion did not flinch. He simply met her eyes. "The nightmares will return," she finally stated, her voice heavy with resignation. "Yes," Orion agreed. "Fear is not something you defeat once. It is something you learn to live beside. But the next time, you will know that the anchor is there." Lyra's lip curled in a barely perceptible bitter smile. "My generals demand a complete psychological profile of you, Kar. They want to know the source of your effectiveness. I will tell them this. Your human calm is a variable that is now essential to my command readiness. You are hereby reassigned. You will report directly and only to me. You will be my personal empath linguist." The decree was stunning. It immediately elevated the low-ranking translator to a position of unparalleled proximity to the War Princess, bypassing the entire Elven military hierarchy. This single decision, made in the privacy of her study, was a direct affront to the ancient, arrogant authority of the Star-Forged legions. Lyra knew the unrest this would cause, and she knew her army would be watching his every move, waiting for the slightest misstep that would prove the human was a parasite to be violently purged. The War Princess was cured of her immediate terror, but she had just ignited a slow-burning fuse of fury and suspicion within the very ranks that were sworn to protect her. The promotion of Orion Kar sent shockwaves through the command structure. The Elven generals, beings who measured their service in centuries, were apoplectic that a 2-decade-old human translator was now privy to the deepest strategic secrets of the supremacy. They saw it as an insult to their lineage and a direct threat to their power. In the days that followed, Orion accompanied Princess Lyra everywhere, not as a bodyguard or advisor, but as an anchor. He sat silently through battle simulations, stood unobtrusively in the corners of diplomatic meetings, and remained within sight during Lyra's brief, mandated periods of rest. The Drakes, Ignis and Silas, never left the humans' immediate vicinity. Ignis would occasionally perch on Orion's shoulder during less formal moments, and Silas often slept at his feet, their unspoken approval a shield stronger than any armored escort. The army, however, remained skeptical and deeply resentful. Captain Valeras, now relegated to observing the situation from a distance, saw the growing resentment among the legates. They whispered of sabotage, of human mind tricks, and of the ultimate disgrace this alliance brought upon the Starforged. The time for a decisive action against the human was fast approaching. The true test arrived during the final phase of the Shadowfall exercise, the largest wargame conducted by the legions in a decade. Lyra was alone in the primary simulation room, guiding a projected fleet through a nebula ambush scenario. Orion stood near the entrance, watching the complex, three-dimensional light show of battle unfold. Suddenly, the Citadel's core energy systems faltered. The simulation screen plunged into darkness, and the room was lit only by the emergency red glow of auxiliary lights. A silent alarm flashed across Valerius's wrist cuff. Unauthorized access. Core generator malfunction. This was no test. "Princess, we have an intrusion," Valerius's voice crackled over the internal comms. "The main reactor core is destabilizing. It appears to be a highly localized energy drain, designed to knock out the command center." Lyra's composure, usually ironclad, began to crack. She knew this signature. It matched the rogue energy weapon that had caused the catastrophic collapse of the colony moon, the very event that was the root of her paralyzing nightmares. The sudden darkness, the specific hum of the draining energy, triggered an immediate visceral reaction. She sank back into her command chair, her hands flying to her head, her breath catching in her throat. The paralysis was instant and total. She wasn't seeing the Citadel. She was back on the command ship, watching the moon crack open, reliving the horror. Ignis shrieked, a high, desperate sound, and flew toward her, spitting harmless, panicked bursts of plasma. Silas rushed to her side, his great jaws agape in distress. The War Princess was non-functional. Valerius and his guards burst into the room. The human! It was a diversion. Seize him! But Orion did not wait to be seized. He saw Lyra's eyes, glazed over with terror, and he recognized the signature of her fear. He moved with a speed the elves did not expect from him. Ignoring the shouting legates and the defensive snaps of the drakes, he knelt directly in front of Lyra's chair, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "Lyra, listen to me. The moon is safe. The fleet is holding. The Legion needs its commander. They need your calm." He didn't speak of rain this time, but of the energy crisis itself. Feel the cold floor under your boots. That is real. Hear the hum of the auxiliary lights. That is real. The crisis is electrical, not existential. It is a problem, not a ghost. Look at me. Lyra's terror was a tangible wave of psychic static, but Orion held her gaze. He reached out and with stunning boldness, placed his hand over her wrist, checking her pulse with the simple practical gesture of a medic. "Steady. Your heart is steady," he insisted. "You are here. You are not that girl in the command chair from years ago. You are the War Princess. Order me. Give me the tactical command." The challenge jolted her. Her mind, dragged back from the abyss by the sheer force of the human's proximity and voice, grasped the single undeniable thread of reality he offered. She focused on the warmth of his hand, the steady beat beneath his thumb, the sheer humanity of the gesture. Her eyes cleared. "Valerius," she grated out, her voice still shaky but regaining its command cadence. "Orion is correct. The threat is energy. Stabilize the core. Initiate Protocol Delta Niner to reroute auxiliary power through the orbital defense grid." Valerius, stunned by the instant shift from catatonia to tactical brilliance, hesitated only a fraction of a second before snapping, "Yes, Princess." He and his team immediately moved to address the core breach. The threat was real, but the Princess was back. The energy drain was neutralized within minutes. The main lights returned, washing the scene in harsh white light. Lyra stood, facing Orion, who had slowly risen. The room was silent, except for the whirring of restored ventilation. "You risked everything," she stated, her gaze intense. "You command the Legion's Princess," Orion replied simply. "I was only safeguarding the command structure." The doors to the room slid open, and a crowd of legates, generals, and officers who had rushed to the command center stood watching. They had seen the entire exchange, the instant, paralyzing fear of their commander, the aggressive rush to seize the human, and the impossible, instantaneous return to command readiness, facilitated entirely by one unthreatening, steady Terran, Valerius, the High Guard captain, stepped forward, not to speak to Lyra, but to Orion. He stopped before the human, his massive, armored frame dwarfing Orion's. Then slowly, with the weight of centuries of elven tradition in the gesture, Valerius placed his fist over his heart and performed the Starforged salute, a gesture usually reserved only for the Supremacy Council. "Translator Carr," Valerius's voice was stripped of all arrogance. "You have saved the princess from a fate worse than death twice. You have proven that humanity's calm is a force that strengthens, not weakens. My captaincy and the legions under my command swear fealty to the woman you protect. We will follow her, and by extension, we will trust the anchor you provide." In that moment, the entire Starforged army, represented by its most decorated captain, shifted its loyalty. It was not a fealty won by plasma fire or massive war machines, but by the quiet resilience of one ordinary man who understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the steady hand that guided a soul through it. The War Princess was truly healed, not by a cure, but by a choice, the choice to trust the human heart. This is the end of the story. If you enjoyed the unique power of humanity's calm, subscribe for more epic HFY stories. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of the Starforged Legions.